I'm going to briefly introduce our sponsors for tonight's event. Defending Utah is the leading local organization, a community of activists working to educate citizens on true principles, restoring our culture of liberty, and exposing those conspiring to take away our freedoms. The Ezra Taft Benson Society, the objective they have is to promote an understanding of our civic responsibilities, the threat of secret combinations, and the principles of liberty and good government in light of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. After tonight's speaker is finished, I would ask that you please remain seated for our closing prayer, and then please also hold any questions, amazing questions, just hold them till afterward. And you'll have time to mingle and meet with Ben afterward, and anyone else that you want to speak to. So please feel free to stay afterward. We're not kicking you out. You can stay a little bit afterwards. So now to introduce our speaker tonight. Ben McClintock is the co-founder, membership coordinator, and investigative reporter for defendingutah.org. He has been featured in USA Today, Fox News, and many other regional newspapers throughout the West. Ben is a popular guest and regularly appears on radio programs throughout the state of Utah because of his over 15 years of experience in original research, writing, speaking, and organizational leadership. Ben also recently co-produced the popular documentary, The 12th Article of Faith, Must Christians Obey the Government? Among many others, which can be viewed on the Defending Utah YouTube channel. So please feel free to check those out. What is not written here on my piece of paper is what a wonderful human being Ben McClintock is. I joined Defending Utah last year, and it's been a privilege to get to know him and the other members of this organization. And what I have found is how sincere and generous he is with the research and the information that they have found. And I find it to be very valuable. And so I hope that you will too. So there's a bit of disclaimer, and we talked about this. There's a bit of a disclaimer that we want to give about this presentation. Some of you may have had it in a lesser form. This is our extended edition tonight. I'm just going to say it up front and preface it that there might be a thing or two or three that is presented to you tonight that you will find upsetting. You might not have heard it before, or it just might be difficult to swallow. That is okay. That is probably normal. I would say that as I was waking up last year, I had a strong foundation in liberty and true principles of agency, but what I was clueless on was the conspiracy. And I'm not here, I didn't grow up in Utah, so especially didn't even know the history of Utah. So I think it's fair to say most people, there's a lot we weren't taught. A lot that's not taught in our schools, not taught in the media, for sure. They teach the opposite of what we need to hear. So for those of you, and it won't be everyone, but there'll be some of you that will have cognitive dissonance. And it will be something that I hope you will push through. I had to push through it, and every week I follow this pattern of researching, finding knowledge, and testing it, see if it squares with the truth that I know to be true. So it can be difficult. I hope you won't fault us for that, because I think that's just the world we live in, where there's a lot of lies and deception, and I think a lot of us are waking up to that. So I hope that we are sensitive to other people in this room that are in maybe the early stages of the waking up process. If you're not, that's great. I hope you will do your part in helping wake people up. And we have lots of resources over there and information that we can send you to be able to help others. So I just needed to preface that. Ultimately, we know that it's principles we follow, and we need to receive our own understanding of what is true. Don't take any man's word for it, or woman, but you take it to your Father in heaven, who upbraideth not, and all that truth will be made known to you, hopefully line upon line as you keep going. So that being said, I hope you find a lot of value in the presentation that Ben's going to give tonight. It has come with years of sacrifice and sincerity and discovering the truth and making it available to you tonight. So let me turn the time over to Ben McClintock.
All righty. Well, so we're going to do a little bit more prefacing. There have been a lot of great people and organizations that have done a lot of great research and important research on secret combinations in general, or the global conspiracy that we face. And the fact that we named the presentation that we are doing tonight on Utah's secret combinations, we are assuming that you've done some research, that you accept the fact that there is one. We figured you probably wouldn't show up tonight if that wasn't the case. At least we're hoping. But with that, the more that you have studied and the more that you've learned about how the modern day conspiracy works, the more a lot of this will click and make sense, because there's a lot of assumptions that are made, a lot of background that we're hoping most people have, but we do have some background that we do give to a lot of it as well, for those of you that maybe some of this might be very new to. And so we're identifying who the Gannett robbers are here locally. This was something that started with Shahzad and I, the co-founders of Defending Utah, several years ago, back in 2012 and 2013. We asked ourselves, we said, this is a global conspiracy, and this conspiracy is ultimately a battle between Christ and Satan. And if that's really what this comes down to, wouldn't it make sense that Satan would if they're doing horrible things in New York and California, if they're doing these horrible things there, wouldn't it make sense that they're doing those things here? If this is where the head of the kingdom of God is. And so that was where we started with our hypothesis, and we went down and we were able to start off with that foundation of understanding the global conspiracy, and then expanding from there, saying, okay, how come the United Nations is implementing its program here in Utah? We're supposed to be concerned. How is this doing? How is this happening? How are all these different programs of the conspiracy being implemented in the state of Utah? And so we're going to pull that together. But the first thing I want to answer is the question of why even talk about secret combinations? Why does that even matter? Brigham Young said that we should not only study good and its effect upon our race, but also evil and its consequences. In the Doctrine and Covenants, we hear that we should waste and wear out our lives exposing the hidden things of darkness. When we wear something out, it's not because it's neglected and off to the side, it's because we're using it over and over again. Also in Ether chapter 8, when Moroni takes some time out exposing and talking about the secret combinations during his day and during the time of the Jaredites, he talks about the secret combinations that we're facing today. And he says, why am I talking about this? He says that he was commanded to write about these secret combinations so that evil may be done away, and that the time may come that Satan may have no power upon the hearts of the children of men. Just focusing on what we're for and stopping there, we can't do away with evil. Moroni says we've got to understand the evil side so that we can make sure that Satan has no power. That way we're not being fooled by wolves in sheep's clothing. And if we go back to Sun Tzu in The Art of War, he says that if we understand ourselves and we understand our enemy, we cannot be imperiled in 100 battles. But if we only understand ourselves, then we're going to lose half of the battles. And that's what makes Defending Utah really different from a lot of other organizations, is that we don't just talk about the principles of liberty and the principles of the Constitution and limited government. We help you understand why aren't we obeying the Constitution anymore? And it isn't happening by accident. We don't believe in the accidental theory of history. We believe in the fact that history is replete with conspiracy. Sometimes, though, when you bring up the idea that we are facing conspiracy, it can kind of make people feel overwhelmed and that there's maybe nothing to do about it. But I really take the opposite approach. Because the things that we're facing, they're like fires, right? We have high taxes and attacks on property rights, and the attacks on the unborn, attack on the family, and just attack after attack. And if these weren't happening on purpose, if these were all just spontaneous fires, just spontaneously combusting all by themselves, and all these are very important, if we don't have the ability to, provide for our families and and we don't have the ability to protect the unborn, then each one of these things depend on each other. And so if these are all things that we've got to focus on, and we've got to, like a whack-a-mole, we've got to go after them all, they're all going to keep on coming up, that's what's impossible. But we understand that these fires, though, are not happening by accident. That what we're facing is an arsonist starting fires on purpose. And we understand that, then we can be more effective in our efforts to be able to preserve liberty and destroy the secret combinations in preparation for the second coming of the Lord, which we'll get into. And when we talk about the conspiracy, though, before we've really started to get into it and start to understand what's really going on, we get into this dichotomy and this idea that we want to reject the truths that we're facing because we're stuck in this idea of personalities, focusing on who's right as opposed to what's right. And so today what we really want to do is to help encourage all of us to do better in focusing on what's right instead of who's right. We're focusing on principles. And the more that we understand principles, the more that we can identify wolves in sheep's clothing. So if you have a background and history of understanding the conspiracy in general, we want to give you some background, how the conspiracy came to Utah. And we have to go back through history of how the saints came here. We had the pioneers, right? Before the saints came out to Utah, we wanted to live according to the principles of the Constitution. But because the federal government had apostatized from the Constitution, we had to flee the United States. Now that can seem really contradictory that you say you leave America to live according to the Constitution. But when the government violates the Constitution, that's what you have to do if you want to, again, stick to correct principles. So they came out west, and we formed our own independent nation called Deseret. It was an independent nation with our own money, our own laws, our own culture and society. But that didn't last very long. We had a lot of during this time period, we were here for about a year to 2 years, and the United States, didn't want that to stand, and so they made a treaty, even though we came here and we claimed this territory as our own without any opposition from Mexico, and it was ours, but the United States met with Mexico, and they entered into what was called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where then the United States claimed Deseret as their own. And so to protect, though, the church's interest, the church created its own political party, the People's Party. You can see up there, that's a sample, it's a scan of their list of candidates that the church had running for office. Now today, when we have this culture, this idea of political neutrality, it seems kind of weird that the church would have its own political party, but at this period in our history, that's what we had. But there was a lot of different anti-Mormon sentiment being sent out to Washington, D.C., and so the United States sent out Johnson's army to quell the so-called Mormon rebellion. And Johnson's army, as a part of that, came out with the Utah Peace Commission. Now the military, right, just like we see today, where everything the government does is the exact opposite, right? We have No Child Left Behind, we have the Patriot Act. All these things are all the opposite. The military, this is the military bringing out the Utah Peace Commission, seems just completely Orwellian, where it's the exact opposite of what it is. And so during this time, James Buchanan was the President of the United States, and as a part of the Peace Commission, they deposed Brigham Young as the duly elected governor and said, people of Utah, you are no longer allowed to choose your own leaders. You are not allowed to choose who your governor is going to be. Us, all-powerful, all-knowing people in the federal government are going to send you a governor from a different state to make sure you guys don't get out of line. And so as a part of this, from the Utah War until we became a state, there were 12 different governors imposed on us by the federal government. One of those governors, when he was here, went throughout the entire state and replaced over 200 elected officials throughout the state with his own puppets throughout the state. So this leads us to the John Taylor and the First Presidency issuing a statement in the Deseret News. And that statement said, "The scenes which we are now witnessing in this territory are the results of a deep laid and carefully planned conspiracy He wasn't afraid to use that word conspiracy, the C word, the dreaded C word. He recognized it for what it was. And he says that the people that were involved in this were the rich, the poor, the moral, the immoral, the religious, the irreligious, all of these people from different backgrounds. They've affected a wonderful secret combination with the purpose to combine to destroy Mormonism. That was the purpose behind this conspiracy. So we have these two cultures, right? We have the saints who loved the Constitution, loved individual liberty and natural law, came here to live according to those principles. Then you have a nation that had apostatized from the things that it was founded upon, and they're trying to merge these two cultures together again. Even though one of them left, they said, no, we don't want that. We want to merge you guys together again. So how do you get two different, diametrically opposed cultures to be able to get back together again? Karl Marx, in the Communist Manifesto, explains this process. You probably heard it by different names. But in the Communist Manifesto, he says, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which in the course of the movement outstrip themselves and necessitate further inroads upon the old social order. So this is essentially, you break it down, and what he's talking about is the boiling the frog approach. He says these things are done in economically insufficient and untenable ways. Each change is insufficient. It's so small that if you don't want to go along with it, you're the unreasonable one. You're the jerk for not being willing to compromise with other people. But they recognize that each of those small changes actually has within that change the necessity for the next change, and then for the next and for the next, until all of a sudden, 1 degree at a time, all of a sudden you're a completely different people than you were in the beginning. So there was the people that were trying to get us to merge again culturally into Babylon again, recognized 3 different parts of our culture. That they said that if they could control this part of these 3 things in Utah, they could control every aspect of us. So I want to go into that. What is that social order? What is the part of the culture that we were building, right? This is what was intended. And what the conspiracy that John Taylor talked about recognized and identified that they had to get rid of. The first one was our economic independence. And the other one is our political culture, right? Sticking to principles of natural law and the Constitution. And our educational culture. I'm going to go through each one of those, give examples of what was being built, give the example of how the conspiracy was working against that. So Brigham Young taught, they want the Mormons to build cities for them to possess, and this we shall do no more for them. So we're building up Missouri, and then we get driven out, and we build up Illinois, we get driven out. We're coming back to Utah, and they're really repeating that same process. If we build cities, we mean to possess them. We are building this, and we're going to be independent of the world. And to do that, he says, the Lord says that we shall never do another day's work, nor spend another dollar to build up a Gentile city or nation. That right there, right? We're not, the Lord says that we're not supposed to do another day's work, nor spend another dollar building up Babylon, so that we can be independent. Now we have the first governor that was imposed on us by the federal government coming to speak to the legislature. And he says, the laws that Deseret were made in isolation without our oversight, without the federal government's oversight. And you cannot expect a continuance of that isolation, which has characterized your early history. So now new relations between us must occur, and I urge you to appoint committees to prepare new laws suited for your re-entrance into the national system. So in government history books and in the government school system, they teach us that we were begging to rejoin the Union and become a state again. This was all done through machinations and through blackmail and different threats to get us, to force us, right? Why would we leave something that we were begging to rejoin? It was done through coercion. Now, the second part of our culture is not submitting to unconstitutional government. John Taylor famously said, I defy the United States. Now, today, we think of this idea of civil disobedience is outside of our cultural norms here in Utah now. But during these times, when the government was doing something unconstitutional, it was our job to defy the United States. We are today, and this is the reason behind it, we are today a kingdom of priests that it is essential that we submit to the laws of that priesthood and be governed by them in all of our actions. And in fact, John W. Taylor, the son of John Taylor, explained that even though we have these governors imposed on us by the federal government, the legislature took no action without approval of the church president. So we were still, culturally speaking, saying, no, he's really the head of this government. He was really the one that we chose. And John Taylor explained again this principle. He says, what do we mean by the kingdom of God? There's the church of God and the kingdom of God. The church refers to more spiritual things, and the kingdom to temporal rule and government. So culturally, we understood at this point in time that the kingdom of God and the church of God were two separate organizations with two very separate goals and programs. And so there was a lot of different things going on at this time that they were trying to do to crush this idea of the kingdom of God and to get the Latter-day Saints to get merged into that system. And so one of the laws that were passed, this was in 1882, this was the Edmunds Act, and this had restrictions that were enforced regardless of whether an individual was practicing polygamy or were merely stated a belief in the church, when the church's doctrine of plural marriage without actually participating. So if you just believed in these things, then it applied to you, and it was it disenfranchised you as a citizen, took away your rights. Now, the Edmunds-Tucker Act, a few years later in 1887, it disincorporated the church. It was no longer a legal entity. And this was the first time that getting a government permission to get married started to be instituted. And it banned religious books in schools. And it required anti-polygamy oaths to the government if you were going to not go to jail. And it also confiscated all of the church's property. And so this was a direct attack on the church. And then after the Edmunds-Tucker Act, we go to 1889, there was a bill introduced called the Cullum-Strumble Bill. And what this bill went a step further of what the Edmunds-Tucker Act did, and it said even if didn't matter what you believed, didn't matter what you practiced, just simply being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints meant you were stripped of all rights of citizenship. You could not own property, you could not vote, you could not serve on a jury. So if you were accused of a crime, everybody on that jury wanted to put you in prison, basically. And so at that point in time, our congressman here in Utah was a guy by the name of Frank Cannon. And Frank Cannon he was the son of George Q. Cannon in the first presidency. And he calls up his dad, or whatever they do in 1890, and say, I need your help, right? I need you to come out to Washington, D.C., and to help us to put a stop to this bill. And so they're able to negotiate an arrangement where the Cullum-Strumble Bill, which is why most of us have never even heard of it, never actually became law. And so Frank Cannon has a conversation with this guy, James Blaine, who is the Secretary of State at the time. And James Blaine goes to Frank Cannon and says, wouldn't it be possible for your people to find some way to bring yourselves into harmony with the law and institutions of this country? You are too weak to set yourselves up as superior to this nation, and we'll help you this time, but nothing permanent can be done until you get into line. We're going to keep going after you and keep going after you until you do what we say. They used a lot of boogeymen to get these things introduced and get these things passed in the past. And this guy right here, Robert Newton Baskin, one of the least famous, most influential people in Utah's history. He was the author of that bill, the Cullum-Strumble Bill. And he, behind the scenes, he gave the reason. What was the real purpose why he wanted this bill to be passed? He said the purpose of this bill was to take away from the priesthood the political power which he felt it had so long wrongfully usurped and shamefully abused. These bills were about destroying the political kingdom of God. So when we go to this guy right here, he's Eli Murray. He was the governor of Utah, imposed on us in the 1880s. And he would write reports, send them back to Washington, D.C. And in this report, he said, what do I care as to their beliefs? Their right to that belief I would defend. But obedience to law is required, and the exercise of temporal power by ecclesiastical authority will no longer be tolerated. So this idea, in the First Amendment where it says the free exercise of religion, we were not having any of that here in Utah under Eli Murray. He went on to say, if the Mormons continue to promote liberty in the kingdom of God, the sword will be invoked to subdue them. Just like today, when people want to stand up for their rights and stand up for liberty and promote the Constitution, we have statists accuse us of being violent. And it's always the statists, like Eli Murray, that threaten violence against those that simply want to protect their rights. He explained the line in the sand. He said, either the church will have to surrender or the government will. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This was the line in the sand because this is a battle between Christ and Satan. It says, the exercise of political power by ecclesiastical authority, which is not tolerated elsewhere, should be abolished in Utah. So now we move on to principle 3 of our educational independence. Education is very important to the Lord. In the Doctrine and Covenants, there we find a revelation about W. Phelps and Oliver Cowdery, where they're commanded to print and to write books for schools, and that little children may also receive instruction before me as is pleasing to me. Education, very important, but also has to be set within the bounds that the Lord has set. And so what are some principles behind that? Brigham Young taught this key principle, which goes back to natural law. It says, I'm opposed to free education as much as I am opposed to taking away property from one man and giving it to another. Would I encourage free schools by taxation? No. So this idea, right, this goes back to the proper role of government. And the other principles that were taught was the importance of making sure that Latter-day Saints were taught by Latter-day Saints, that Methodists were taught by Methodists, and that atheists were taught by atheists, that the children should be raised in the beliefs or non-beliefs of their parents and let them make that choice later on. But that was not something, because they needed to control the education of the youth to be able to bring them up to the beliefs of the state. And so you have Alfred Cumming again speaking to the legislature, butting them up, saying, you guys have some awesome schools in Utah. But as of yet, you have no free or common schools. So some systems should therefore be adopted to enable every child to obtain these benefits. So getting the people of Utah to go against what their leaders were teaching them. And in fact, so at this point in time, we had, the church had schools, K through 12, but they cost money. That was one of the principles, was sacrifice. Sacrificing for the education of your children. But some of the saints didn't like sacrificing, didn't like paying for the schools of their children. And so sometimes they didn't pay for their bill, or there was another thing that happened where other churches would come into Utah and set up free schools. And then members of the church would then send their kids to Presbyterian or Anglican or Methodist churches, schools. And because these schools, it's not free to, teachers can't teach all day for free. And so they would go back and they would raise money amongst their congregations around the country and report back to how effective they're being in Utah. And so in the Presbyterian Conference in the 1881, their General Assembly, they bragged that they said, our schools unsettle the faith of the children of Mormonism. These schools develop into churches as a rule. The schools are the entering wedge to split parental opposition through the children. So they understood that this was the long game. They recognized that if they could get the kids at a young age, then things they couldn't do with the adults would be more effective. In fact, that's exactly what this Anglican bishop said when raising money for his schools. He says, in Utah especially, schools were the backbone of our missionary work. Adults were fanatics, but the plastic minds of the young we could hope to win. And this is the same principle. Even if we're not sending our children off to sectarian schools, were basically sending them off to government churches to be indoctrinated in the religion of the state. So you can see in the long game, if you can get control of the economics, control of the politics, and control of the education of the youth, you essentially control a society. And this conspiracy that John Taylor warned us about is something we need to understand, that it was not by accident, and that there were many organizations working together. So now the Utah organizations, okay? To start off, you have, to get to the same goal, the end goal of communism, you have basically two roads. You have the communist goal, which is the in-your-face, the violent, revolutionary takeover. And then you have the Fabian socialists, going back to what Karl Marx talked about in the Communist Manifesto, that does things slowly, one small step at a time. And the first organizations in Utah took the more in-your-face, violent approach. And one of these organizations, most of these organizations, so I'm going to talk about two of them. You have the Gentile League and the Utah Loyal League. And in current history books that you have in government schools, and even just generically written history books about Utah, they don't talk about these organizations. I've been through libraries all over the state, in universities and in public libraries, and the current books don't talk about these organizations. On the rare case, when they do talk about it, we have this book right here, produced by the university, Utah State University, and they leave it out. And in fact, this is how they explain the Loyal League, for example. It says extracurricular activities in the Loyal Leagues, Liberty Brigades, sewing circles, and similar youth clubs would, it was hoped, bind them to Protestantism. So here the Loyal League was promoted as a group for the young to make sure that we keep Protestant youth in Protestantism. But if you go back to contemporary records and the contemporary history published during that time, during the 1800s, this is what the Utah Loyal League was. This was a secret society, and the purpose of the Loyal League was to eradicate the doctrine of the Mormons. It says the objects of the Utah Loyal League are to combine the loyal people of Utah in opposition to the political rule of the so-called Mormon Church. So you have the history books completely lying and changing history about what these organizations were about. Now we go to the other organization, the Gentile League, and you have to go back again to contemporary histories to be able to even know about these organizations. One of them, we actually have a few copies at the table, is the first volume of the History of Utah by Orson Hyde. And it talks about the Loyal League. And this Loyal League was a secret society, the Gentile League. Secret society known as the Gentile League of Utah. And within its program was the deliberate massacre of municipal officers and citizens. And this wasn't some fringe group. In the state of Utah, this Gentile League had over 2,000 members statewide. Now, today, if an organization had 2,000 members, it's a pretty sizable organization, organized for the same purpose. Now, just go back to the 1800s, and it's an even larger percentage of the population. And again, it wasn't just the fringe people. These were people that were in government. We had the mayor, we had judges. In fact, we had Robert Newton Baskin that we just mentioned earlier, the author of the bill. And you've got Judge William Hayden. He declared that if their program was interrupted, the streets of Salt Lake would be seen running down with blood. That's a judge, a federal judge. This is their purpose. So they had these programs to be able to be the more in-your-face communist approach to try and get, right, what John Taylor was, the purpose was the eradication of Mormonism. But they realized that they couldn't, this wasn't as effective. And so we have Vice President Schuler Colfax came to Utah. And he was talking to some prominent individuals throughout the state to say, should we do a second invasion? Do we need the Utah War version 2.0 to be able to get the Mormons to get into line? And so one of the people that the Vice President of the United States, when he came to Utah, met with, was this guy, a guy by the name of William Godbey. Most people haven't heard of him either. But William Godbey, he was a guy that was a convert to the church from England. And he called himself a Robert Owen Mormon. Most people today, who's Robert Owen, nobody would even consider to call themselves a Robert Owen Mormon because they don't even know who Robert Owen is. Robert Owen is the modern day, is really the founder of modern day communism. He was the one that actually trained Karl Marx and Frederick Engels before they wrote the Communist Manifesto. And when you read the history of the church, it talks about how Joseph Smith went to a lecture on socialism and he didn't believe the doctrine, it says. Well, it was a Robert Owen lecture on socialism. And William Godbey, when he came, so he's following this modern day socialist, and he is also into the occult. He does seances, he does table tapping, he does Ouija boards, and on and on and on. All of the different witchcraft and occult type things that you can imagine somebody doing. But yet he's a convert to the church. So he's come to Utah, and he's into these occult practices, and he says, I don't like this isn't what I signed up for. I don't like this kingdom of God stuff. I want to make Utah more like New York and more like San Francisco. We got to be more metropolitan. We don't want to be economically independent. We want to merge with Babylon as much as possible. And so he used his influence with business owners that were members of the church to be able to undermine things from within. In fact, one of the things that he did one year, instead of going to General Conference, he went to New York City, and he went and did a seance where the guy that was doing the seance started to speak in a voice that sounded like Heber C. Kimball. And of course, it was an evil spirit, and it was telling him, yeah, you can't trust the scriptures, you can't trust church leaders, just keep on doing what you're doing. And so when the Vice President of the United States comes to Utah, he knows who William Godbey is and what his goals are. And so William Godbey tells Vice President Colfax, no, don't do a second invasion. What you need to do is help me to undermine things from within, because that's going to be much more effective. When you go after the members, they stand strong and they stand together. But when if you can help me and do these things under the table, then we can be much more effective. And so with that help, they didn't do a second invasion of Utah. Instead, they did help William Godbey out, and they helped him form a newspaper, which later on became the Salt Lake Tribune. And so William Godbey, he was, because of these efforts, he was excommunicated in 1869. And a lot of interesting story behind his excommunication. In fact, he wanted to hide the fact because a lot of the prominent members of the church he was very close to, and he didn't want them knowing that he was a part of the occult, that he was doing these seances. And so in his excommunication trial, he wanted to make sure, when it started to come up, he put the kibosh on that really quickly. But he was excommunicated, and then he died in August of 1902. Now, what's interesting, though, is William Godbey was the godfather of a church president by the name of Heber J. Grant. Let me go, let's see here. Oh, I'm going to come at the same time. So William Godbey, after the death of Heber J. Grant's father, raised his mom, Heber J. Grant's mom worked for William Godbey, and they lived in William Godbey's home. And so in 1902, when William Godbey dies, Heber J. Grant writes a eulogy. And in that eulogy, he says, "I never knew a more generous, bigger-hearted, or more faithful man." So it's kind of interesting that this guy that knew the apostles and was an apostle and knew Brigham Young and John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff thought highly of William Godbey. So as a part of this movement, during this time of taking the more soft approach, an organization was formed in 1883 that exists to this day because it's been more effective than the more frontal approach. And that organization is called the Alta Club. And you go to their biography, their autobiography that they wrote about themselves. They say that they were formed for the purpose of allowing Gentiles to build businesses and business relationships in a Mormon-dominated climate, right? All the Mormons are practicing economic independence, so the Gentiles need a way to be able to get together. And they claim that it was just a social club, which always stuck firmly to its original purpose of being social, and that it never took sides on any issue. It neither advocated nor opposed public causes. Now, when we came across this, because of the background that we had of information being leaked to us, of what the Alta Club was actually into, this reminded us more of how the Council on Foreign Relations talks, and how they say that they're a nonpartisan think tank out of one side of their mouth, and the other side of their mouth, they're trying to build world government, and they want to strengthen the United Nations. And so we wanted to dig a little bit further. And so one of the documents that we were able to come across was the Journal of Heber J. Grant during the time that we were becoming a state. We had the state's constitutional convention where we were writing our constitution, and the church sent Apostle John Henry Smith to the convention to make sure that the church's interests were at least represented. And so John Henry Smith tells Heber J. Grant, naming the Alta Club by name, says that they have agreed to work against women's right to vote, and that they propose to use their influence to defeat the Constitution if equal suffrage were made a part of it. So their claim that they were not supporting or opposing public causes is completely false. In fact, when you read further in their autobiography, they admit what their real agenda of their organization is. It's the Alta Club played important roles in diminishing the bitterness of the conflict between the church and the world to a point which permitted the territory to become a state and to function politically under the national system. Okay, so their goals, however we're different and separate, is to politically and culturally merge us with the world. That's what their goal is then, and that's what their goal is today as an organization. Now, there are members, just like you look at other conspiratorial organizations like the Illuminati, they have levels within levels. Bottom level people, like in the Alta Club, they think they're just there to be able to build relationships, business relationships. But the higher up that you go in the organization, this is their ultimate goal. And so to understand how the conspiracy works, Satan doesn't have any new ideas because the old ideas work really well. And so we just have to look at history to see how the conspiracy operates. We go to the book of Helaman, and it explains that they did unite with those bands of robbers and did enter into their covenants and their oaths that they would protect and preserve one another in whatsoever difficult circumstances they should be placed, that they should not suffer for their murders and their plunderings and their stealings. So we see how the secret combinations work. They protect each other in their crimes. They make sure that they don't get in trouble for murdering. They make sure that they don't get in trouble for stealing and for plundering. They are protected in their crimes. Now we go to when Cleon Skousen was the chief of police in Salt Lake City. At the same time, you have J. Bracken Lee. He was the mayor of Salt Lake. And as the mayor, he comes to the chief of police and tells him, you are not allowed to go after the Alta Club. Names the Alta Club by name and says, you are not allowed to go after them. And in fact, if you go to their website in the past, they've talked about their organization and their organization's involvement in illegal gambling and in producing alcohol and selling alcohol during Prohibition. And this was something that actually led to Cleon Skousen being fired, as he wouldn't do what J. Bracken Lee said. And so we go back to the Alta Club's autobiography. Well, before we get into that, they protect each other in their crimes. And so me and Shazad one day went out as part of our investigation into the organization. We went through and we presented ourselves to the Alta Club and asked for a tour. We said, hey, we were looking at maybe becoming a member. We want to find out more about you guys. And so the front desk was just like an intern lady, and she agreed to give us a walk-around tour around their building in downtown Salt Lake. And along the way, there was a painting on the wall of this guy on his knees begging this woman for forgiveness. Shazad's like, oh man, he must have gotten in trouble, must have done something really bad. And the lady just nonchalantly says, oh, he probably got caught with a prostitute. And then she points to the door and says, oh, and that's where they sneak them into this day. And so admitting their continued involvement in illegal activity. In fact, their own autobiography talks about their involvement in organized crime. It says the groups in contact with the so-called underworld was a man with a nickname of Ed. So the Alta Club is more of your elites, your political and your economic and your academic elites in the state. And they can't be the ones going around doing the dirty work. And so they use the underworld to do their dirty work for them. And at this point in time, the contact, the liaison between the underworld and the Alta Club was a guy with a nickname of Ed. And so Ed dies, and Ed's replacement comes to the Alta Club leadership, and they want three things from the Alta Club to continue the relationship. They say, okay, if we're going to continue this relationship, we want a non-denominational religious leader to speak at Ed's funeral. We want the mayor of Salt Lake to be there, and we want the governor of Utah to be there. And the leaders of the Alta Club said, okay, done, that's fine. And they provided that so they could continue to use the underworld to get their illegal work done for them. So now they're formed in 1883. Let's fast forward to 1983, when Town and Country magazine is focusing on different cities across the country. And in August of 1983, they focus on Salt Lake City specifically, on who, if you're a mover and shaker, who do you want to get to know? And as a part of that, they interview the mayor of Salt Lake at the time, who's Ted Wilson. Now today, Ted Wilson is a part of UCARE and the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. Both of those organizations are directly tied to United Nations Agenda 21 programs. And so in this magazine report, the mayor of Salt Lake City admits, he says, Utah has a power structure that is quite concentrated, and it tends to operate behind closed doors at the Alta Club. So it's admitted, we're meeting at the elites, the power structure meets in secret at the Alta Club. So now we go through, 1883 to 1983. We're going to back up to 1887. Kind of how did we get to this point of where the power structure meets in secret to get things done? How did that happen? You have Caleb West, who was this governor, another one of these governors from Kentucky that was imposed on us by the federal government as a part of the program of the Alta Club in pursuit of pacification, which was supported by several Alta Club founders, was the organization of the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce. So in 1887, the conspiracy, as one of their programs of the conspiracy, is to form the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce as kind of the political arm of these changes to get things together. There could be no question as the purpose of this project, and anyone who participated in it was certainly on the side of liquidation of the conflict. Now, when you have you've got these two sides, it's Christ versus Satan. Now, how do you liquidate this conflict between Christ versus Satan? Satan, of course, if he's trying to liquidate this conflict, he's trying to bring you over to his side as much as he can. And he'll go over as much as he can just to bring you over a little bit. And so that's exactly what what the goals of this organization is. As you can see today, with the things that they're doing, they are the string pullers of the health department and of the legislature and the governor of putting forward all of the programs that we're seeing that are attacking our health freedom rights, the rights of religion, and the rights of businesses. They are the ones that are in the forefront to do this because they are the string pullers that were set up by the Alta Club back in 1887 and continue to this day. Their program is whatever political program is being pushed by them is what the political program of the conspiracy is. And these three Alta Club founders accepted places on the organizing committee to make sure it went in their direction. So because at this time, most members of the church were still under the mindset and of the culture of being economically independent and separate from Babylon. And so we weren't joining the Chamber of Commerce. And so to do that, they went to the leaders of ZCMI. Now ZCMI, when it first started, was this organization, this place to go to be able to get the things as a Latter-day Saint that you needed to get, but you couldn't produce yourself so that you didn't have to go to Babylon to get stuff. So that's how it started. Now, then when it goes out of business, right, in like 2002 or something, it's basically indistinguishable from Dillard's and Macy's. And so in this transition period around this time, you have a different kind of set of leadership of ZCMI than you did when it was first started. You have individuals, just kind of give you some modern day equivalencies, more like your Harry Reid or Mitt Romney type members of the church, if that gives you an... So, not long after the Mormons and Gentiles started working together in the Chamber of Commerce, some of these same Mormons were proposed and accepted as membership in the Alta Club. So they said, okay, because they joined, then all of a sudden this barrier breaks, this mental barrier. Oh, that guy's a good member of the church. It must be okay. And so all of a sudden members start to join the chamber, and then they start to join the Alta Club as well. So now this brings us back up to 1983, and that power structure that the mayor of Salt Lake talked about. And who are they? Who is this group of people that meets in secret at the Alta Club? The magazine answers that question. It says, the structure consisted of the head of the Chamber of Commerce and the publisher of the Salt Lake Tribune. So you have the political arm of it, and you have the cultural arm of it, trying to change the culture through articles, through polls, through opinion pieces, and then you follow that up with legislation to be able to move the society legally, what they're trying to do socially. So, of course, it's branched out. You have a lot of the Chamber of Commerce organizations. You can see now today the Deseret News and KSL, and basically all the mainstream media is a part of this power structure, but it was named specifically by Town & Country magazine at this point. So now you go to we're going to start, we've given you that background and history of the organizations that are meeting in secret to destroy Mormonism. So we talked about just kind of the broad sense, but what I want to do now is start to get into how the international conspiracy that a lot of us, hopefully most of us, if not all of us, have studied a little bit in the past. And one of those organizations is the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is one of the planks of the Communist Manifesto, centralization of credit in the hands of the state. So 1913 was the creation of the Federal Reserve. And this guy right here, unseen guardian of the Federal Reserve, was, this guy right here, Colonel Edward Mandell House. They called him Wilson's brain. And he wanted to build socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. And he was the unseen guardian angel of the Federal Reserve. It was this guy that was kind of the behind-the-scenes power broker to make sure that everything came together, to make sure that the Federal Reserve Bill was passed in 1913. So now, a few years after this, 5 years later to be precise, in 1918, Salt Lake City, this isn't the one that was built in 1918, this is where it is today, we get a branch of the Federal Reserve established here in Utah. They've had several different headquarters. Again, this is the one that they have today. So now why would they want to establish a branch of the Federal Reserve in Utah? Let me go back to a statement, a testimony that was given in General Conference by Heber J. Grant. He said, so he was speaking to Mr. Lynch, the governor of the Federal Reserve Bank, I pledge you the absolute loyalty of the people of Utah. I promise to put over any requirement, no matter how much it is, that is placed on the people of Utah on one condition. Promise you any requirement, no matter how much it is, on one condition. And that is that you will give us a Federal Reserve branch in Salt Lake City. We have the loyalty, and if you will bring the bank here, we will borrow the money and we will do our share. So that's what brought in the Federal Reserve into Utah. Now we go to the Council on Foreign Relations, another branch of the conspiracy, another kind of tentacle of this Hydra monster. And their goal, they say, is to maintain and gradually increase the authority of the United Nations. And they're still building the New World Order. They had an article just a few years ago called World Order 2.0. And its co-founder, right, again, is Colonel Edward Mandell House, who wanted communism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. So we have the Council on Foreign Relations. And they created, a few years after it was formed, so well, the Council on Foreign Relations, let me just kind of back up a little bit why it was formed. You have the Council on Foreign Relations, right? We have World War I. And the purpose of World War I, because right afterwards it was to make the world safe for democracy, as if we wanted that. And it was to, at the end of it, they wanted to start to build world government. And so they introduced this idea of the League of Nations to build us towards a world government. But the American people, thanks to good people like J. Reuben Clark Jr., and to warn the people about the dangers of the League of Nations, and the American people said no, and the League of Nations was stopped. And so people like Colonel Edward Mandell House and others of his ilk that wanted to build this new world order, they got together and they formed the Council on Foreign Relations to help make the American people start to accept the idea of a one world government, which leads us to World War II and the formation of the United Nations. And so, as a part of their tools to get this accomplished, they form another subgroup called the American Committees on Foreign Relations. And if you go to their website, it talks about their history and how they were formed in 1938 by the Council on Foreign Relations for the purpose of bringing business and professional local leaders together to discuss world events due to isolationist attitudes and emerging international conflicts. So because we dared to support American independence in the Constitution, they had to start these local groups to be able to help opinion motors, business interests, to be able to use their influence to get the local people to support this idea of world government. And so we look at their map of where their organizations are, and they've got different clubs all across the country, and they've got one right here in Salt Lake. And in fact, this is their website. You can go there, Salt Lake CFR, slcfr.org. And they have events every single month. And what's interesting about this is every single month, their event is held downtown at the Alta Club. And so you have the Alta Club being this funnel where everything is used from the international conspiracy to get their programs done throughout the state. Now, we have just a couple of examples of prominent Utahns who have been CFR members in the past, not current CFR members, but they've been members in the past. We have former Governor John Huntsman Jr. and Garrett Gong. And so we've got an article on the new at defendingutah.org about John Huntsman and the New World Order. So if you want to read more about that, more documentation about what I'm going to cover right now about John Huntsman, you go to that and you'll learn about that. But I want to give some background about him. So in 1993, he joined the Council on Foreign Relations, and then he leads Envision Utah, which is the leading Agenda 21 organization in Utah. 2007, he supports cap and trade, which is freedom destroying, and it's the Green New Deal type stuff. Then you have 2007, the same year, he backs the forced healthcare mandates, leading us towards Obamacare. He backed the $1 trillion bank bailouts in 2008, supports forcing states to recognize sodomite marriage. 2012, he attended the Bilderberg Conference, joins the Atlantic Council, which is a branch of the Council on Foreign Relations, in 2015, and then he endorsed Mike Lee for U.S. Senate that same year. And in 2019, he also was revealed to be in Jeffrey Epstein's Little Black Book. So here's a screenshot of the article we have. You can read more about that on our website. So he endorsed Mike Lee. Let's get into Mike Lee, some key jobs that he's had since he graduated law school in 1997. He immediately went to clerk for the U.S. District Court. And then just a year later, he clerked in the Supreme Court and did that for many years. And then he went to serve for legal counsel, worked for John Huntsman. And then he went back to the Supreme Court a year later. And then he, after just doing that for a year, then he got hired by Energy Solutions. And then the next job after that was being elected to the U.S. Senate. Okay?
And he's an Alta Club member?
Correct. So kind of go with the record. So we have here Orrin Hatch and Mike Lee. They're throwing a fundraiser for Mitch McConnell. So teamed up with Orrin Hatch to these very much neocon internationalists. The Tribune again reports, no surprise that Lee has trouble with Utah Republican. So here we're starting, the Tribune is starting this campaign to try and make people think it's this complete professional wrestling where they're getting the grassroots conservatives to think that Mike Lee is getting serious support from establishment liberal Republicans, saying that, that he's getting in trouble with Utah's Republican establishment, and it's long been rumored that he'll face an intra-party challenge when he seeks re-election. Okay? So, oh man, there's no doubt about it. He's going to get opposition, and it's going to be, the establishment's going to be going after him all the way. And then next year, he says Mike has a very good intention. This is John Huntsman Jr. Mike has very good intentions, and I say that because I worked with Mike. In fact, I don't know too many people in the legislative branch who are as brilliant as Mike. So he's getting, again, this endorsement from John Huntsman Jr. Then we look at some of his record. He filed to get signatures, right? So he's giving legitimacy to count my vote and destroying the neighborhood caucus, even though he had zero chance of losing at the convention. And literally nobody in the Republican Party ended up actually any legitimate opposition in the primary at all. He sailed right into the nomination. There was zero opposition to him on the Republican side, even though the media wanted to make it look like, make the grassroots Republicans think that he was getting opposition from the insiders, okay? So there was no opposition, but surely the establishment hates Mike Lee is the line that we're supposed to think. So surely the Democrats are going to come up with a top-notch, hard-to-beat candidate that is just going to be really hard for Mike Lee. He's going to have to work really hard to win against the Democrat that year. So who is the best candidate the Democrats could come up with? Misty Snow, a cross-dresser that has worked for the past year as a cashier at Harmon's. This is the best candidate that the establishment could run against Mike Lee, supposedly. So the opposition against Mike Lee has been a complete professional wrestling false opposition. Because we look at his record. What's his record as opposed to his talking points? He sponsored a bill giving President Obama unilateral power to create independence-destroying trade deals. He endorses giving Obama unilateral legislative authority to be able to just veto any line in any bill Congress writes, all by himself. He co-sponsored a new graduated income tax legislation. He also teamed up with Obama to extend the Patriot Act. We got an article about that, it was called the USA Freedom Act. All of the worst parts of the Patriot Act were about to expire. Mike Lee and President Obama teamed up together to extend them to the USA Freedom Act. He then voted he's voted several times, but this is one of the major ones, for the National Defense Authorization Act, meaning that Americans could be detained indefinitely. And he also endorsed Count My Vote by going the signature path, and he voted for warrantless FISA taps in just last year. So he continues to, what his actual record is, as opposed to the rhetoric, is much, much different. And of course, when John Huntsman, his former boss, runs for governor, he endorses him. Okay, now let's move on to another tentacle of this Hydra beast, and Skull and Bones. Okay, this is a part of the international part of the conspiracy.
This week, we look at an organization that has played a major role in American society and politics, Skull and Bones. The official story is that Skull and Bones, or the Order, was started in 1832 primarily by William Huntington Russell, with the help of Alfonso Taft as Chapter 322 of a German secret society. The speculation is that the Order was the Illuminati, but no positive proof has been found that it was. Since Russell studied at the University of Berlin and Skull and Bones became known as the Brotherhood of Death, it is likely that it was part of the Totenbund, or Order of Death, itself a descendant of the Illuminati. A telling clue of their origin, even though circumstantial, is the use of the term the Order, just as the Illuminati was known. The other co-founder of Skull and Bones, Alfonso Taft, played out a more overt influence on America by the positions he held. He became the Secretary of War and the Attorney General in the Grant administration. He ran for governor of Ohio but lost the race over his desire to see the Bible eliminated from the public schools. Of course, Taft's son, William Howard Taft, who was also a member of Skull and Bones, became president. He played the leading role in the establishment of the National Chamber of Commerce, which today plays a dominant role in promoting foreign entanglements under the guise of free trade, all of which is using patient gradualism to destroy American sovereignty.
Okay, so just like the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce, we have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce working on the same thing, to destroy American independence and to merge us into a world system, just like the Salt Lake Chamber is to get us into the national system. So Skull and Bones Secret Society, we have Republicans and Democrats. You look online, there's this, during the 2004 presidential election, you have George W. Bush versus John Kerry, and they were both members of Skull and Bones, and they refused to talk about what that means, and that there were lots of secrets that they couldn't tell. And in fact, one of the initiation rites to be a part of the Skull and Bones is that they lie naked in a coffin with another man to confess all of their sins, all the things that they've done before. So, you know, this organization, it's part of the occult, it's the satanic, and it is part of this global conspiracy to destroy freedom. So it talked about, where is the chapter? When you talk about Skull and Bones, you think of Yale. But there's actually a second chapter of Skull and Bones, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about it. We're talking about the conspiracy in Utah. And so we have in Utah, in 1910, an unnamed Yale alumni comes to the University of Utah and forms a chapter of Skull and Bones here. In fact, when we gave a presentation on it, one of the people attending the presentation said, oh, my father-in-law was actually a member of that, and so they donated his Skull and Bones sweater for us to be able to show off. And so this is part of the Utonian. This is the University of Utah's yearbook, and so there's many pages of this. And in fact, in 2015 and 2018, the school paper actually interviewed members of the Skull and Bones Order. But because, of course, it's fair to assume that they operate the same way as the Yale organization, they can't tell who they are. They can't tell people who they are. So they came to the interview with the school newspaper dressed like this. So we've got some prominent, high-profile people in the state of Utah that have been a part of this chapter of Skull and Bones. You have former U.S. Senator Robert F. Bennett and Robert Hales. So you have another organization. In addition to Skull and Bones, we have the Bohemian Club and the Bohemian Grove. So the Bohemian Grove, or Bohemian Club, was formed in 1882. Since we're having issues with the audio, we'll skip the video. But people have snuck into the Bohemian Grove. So the Bohemian Club, every summer, every late July, early August, this organization is made up of your elites, your political, your media elites, people in news, politics. You have Gingrich, you have the Bushes, you have Clinton, you have Reagan, you have Nixon, you have Walter Cronkite and Jimmy Carter. And they go there to this retreat every summer just north of San Francisco. The headquarters of the club is in downtown San Francisco, but the Bohemian Grove is just north of San Francisco. And they do this ritual where they do this mock human sacrifice to this Babylonian owl god, and it's called the cremation of care, meaning they realize that the things they have to do, right? One of the things they did at the Bohemian Grove was they planned the atomic bomb. And so they realize the things that they're going to be working on are evil and horrible, but it's for the greater good. So they have to sear their consciences with this cremation of care, and so that they can get past that and move forward in doing their work to build the New World Order. And so if you want to just Google the cremation of care, or not Google, but YouTube They've got the videos of that. Not one of the, most, maybe not a great thing to watch on Easter Sunday, but it's something to learn about, to understand what they're doing. So the Bohemian Grove, they're in San Francisco, just north of San Francisco. But they formed a chapter in Salt Lake City in 1886. Yes, the one in San Francisco is that old. It's before 1886. And it was actually the gathering place for the homosexual activists in Utah until, again, went underground in the 1940s. And a prominent Utahn that was a member of the Bohemian Club was John William Gallivan, who was a member of the Alta Club, the publisher of the Salt Lake Tribune, and again, a member of the Bohemian Club. Now, a lot of these names that we brought up, we wanted to make sure, because it would be, if you guys know about some of these things, it would seem kind of weird that we didn't bring it up. And so we wanted to bring up something else that is Utah connected to the Bohemian Club. And so it's semi-well known that about a week or so before the death of Wilford Woodruff, he was actually he was at the Bohemian Club in San Francisco. And so I got this from the church archives. This is the newspaper reports, and they're the Utah Journal that they reported about him being at the Bohemian Club in San Francisco. So he died at the home of Colonel Isaac Trumbo, and he was at a dinner given in his honor at the rooms of the Bohemian Club of San Francisco a few evenings before his death. And so we're going to look at the timeline of what led up to this. So the church is in really financial straits, and so Colonel Trumbo and invites, his parents were active members. He wasn't an active member of the church, but he is still really good friends with church leaders like Heber J. Grant, and he's a member of the Bohemian Club in San Francisco. And so he says, hey, how about you guys come to San Francisco and we can see what we can do to help get you guys some financial help from the bankers there in San Francisco. And so they go there, and before he leaves, so this is the invite, then before he leaves, he's 91 years old, and he has surgery in the 1800s on his intestines, okay? Wouldn't be a good idea nowadays, let alone in the 1800s. Now, then he takes a train ride, right after getting surgery on his intestines at 91 years old, takes a train ride from Salt Lake to San Francisco. And then he has dinner at the Bohemian Club, and then he dies 6 days later. So some people say he was poisoned. Some people wonder, why did he go there and die? Well, and people get confused again between the Bohemian Club and the Bohemian Grove. So he didn't go to the Bohemian Grove, he went to the Bohemian Club, just to kind of clarify that. And so with this, is it reasonable that this 91-year-old guy that just got intestinal surgery and went on a train ride halfway across the country just died? Or did he get poisoned? I don't know, but I think there's some reasonable discussion in either direction. Just want to give everybody that background that maybe if they'd heard about this event, maybe hadn't heard about all the background to it. So let's go a little more to more modern times with this individual. Mitt Romney. Let's look at his record, okay? Going back to even before he was governor of Massachusetts to when he was running for Senate. So in 1994, he supports abortion. He says, in the same year, he says, I feel that all people should be allowed to participate in the Boy Scouts regardless of their sexual orientation. This is the mid-90s. This was like extreme even at that time. 2002, so he also endorsed banning guns. 2002, he said that government should be forced to recognize sodomite marriage. 2008 says God hasn't spoken to anyone since Moses. This was in a local TV broadcast. A newscaster asked him, you can look this up on YouTube as well, the interview. It says, what about this idea if the prophet comes to you and says God tells you to do something, as president of the United States, what are you going to do? And he says, well, I don't think God's spoken to really anybody since Moses or perhaps others. And then in 2017, he supported Antifa. 2019, he became the president of a secret society called the Alfalfa Club. Okay? A lot of people have heard of that one. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. Okay, so this was when he's running for Senate. He wrote, if you've never heard of the Log Cabin Club, they're a group of gay Republicans. And he says that they've played a vital role in reinvigorating the Republican Party. I'm more convinced than ever before that as we seek to establish full equality, because he wants to establish, gay supremacy, I will provide more effective leadership than my opponent. So even more than Ted Kennedy. If we are to achieve the goals we share, we must make equality for gays and lesbians a mainstream concern. So he was supporting sodomite marriage even back then, and what this movement is actually all about is gay supremacy. I believe that the Clinton Compromise was a step in the right direction. I am also convinced that it is the first of a number of steps that will ultimately lead to gays and lesbians being able to serve openly and honestly in our nation's military. He knew that that couldn't happen overnight, like we talked about before. This is all small steps, one step after another, would have been completely extreme at the time, but realized that that was the end goal, and it actually did happen 20 years later after he wrote this letter.
Presidential hopeful Mitt Romney is raising some eyebrows right here in Utah.
Romney was asked about God and what God might say to him or to LDS church leaders. And as Chris Van Oker is here to show us, Romney's answer might surprise you.
Barb, this interview between Romney and a Boston TV station aired about 10 days ago. His comments about the LDS church didn't cause too much of a ripple back east. But here in Utah, they seem to raise questions about how his view of the LDS church was founded.
Our next guest is the former governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney.
In a lengthy interview with one of Boston's most prominent journalists, Mitt Romney was asked the following.
Should God speak to you and ask you to do something that might be in conflict with your duties as president, or should he speak to your prophet who would speak to you? How would you make that decision? How would you handle that?
To which he responded,
I don't recall God speaking to me. I don't know that he's spoken to anyone since Moses in the bush or perhaps some others.
But this answer appears to contradict one of the foundations of the LDS Church. In the church's first vision, a young Joseph Smith is visited by God the Father and Jesus Christ, and that Smith heard God speak the following.
One of them spake unto me, calling me by name, and said, pointing to the other, This is my beloved Son, hear him.
And if, as Romney suggests, that God hasn't spoken to anyone for thousands of years, then what happens to the LDS Church's belief in direct revelation from God to church prophets?
Now, just in 2017, this was what was going on. There was all of the different things where they were tearing down statues, all the big Antifa riots. He says, they're not the same. One side is racist, bigoted Nazi. The other opposes racism and bigotry, morally different universes. So this is the other side, meaning Antifa. So these were the people that he was saying were morally superior to the other side. These were the team that he was supporting. Okay, so now we go to Romney. This is KSL. Romney is president of a secret society in Washington. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah has been named the president of the Alfalfa Club in Washington, D.C. He has been a member of the secret society, which includes politicians, business leaders, and billionaires since 2015. This is a secret society. Romney takes over from another former Massachusetts politician, John Kerry. Okay? So now you go to the mainstream claims. If you go to Wikipedia to try to find out what is this Alfalfa Club all about? What is the secret society all about? So their only purpose, they say, our only job here is once a year we're going to celebrate the birthday of Robert E. Lee. Okay, the secret society to celebrate the birthday of a Confederate general with mainstream politicians like John Kerry and Mitt Romney. And a Confederate general, we're celebrating the birthday of a Confederate general. And Obama is a member of this and attends their celebration, right? Wouldn't the mainstream media, if this is their purpose, is to celebrate the racist, Confederacy, wouldn't they be going after these people and saying that, why are they celebrating this racist person? So it just doesn't even make sense that this is their only purpose. We're a secret society. Their membership. It's limited to elites in government, academia, and business. It's invitation only. If you have to apply, you're guaranteed to not be accepted. It's limited to 200 members at a time. And among these members, we have Joe Biden, Bush Sr. and Jr., Nelson Rockefeller, Mike Pompeo, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Henry Kissinger, Donald Rumsfeld, Orrin Hatch, Chuck Schumer, Mike Bloomberg, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Bill Marriott. So again, right, we've got to avoid the false left-right paradigm where we're thinking Republican good, Democrat bad, because this is a bipartisan game to destroy your freedom and to make you think that one side is better than the other. New members are only accepted when another member dies. Okay? So if you want to get in, you've got to be invited, and you've got to wait for the next guy to die. Okay? So when we were trying to do research, because this was like, okay, it just didn't fit, right? This didn't match, this didn't pass the smell test. You have all these establishment politicians getting together once a year to celebrate the birthday of a Confederate general. That doesn't even make sense. Why is this a secret society? Why aren't we just doing this? And so we were scouring everywhere we could find to find information. Where's a lead that we can go? And everything just led back to basically you're just celebrating the birthday of Robert E. Lee. And then I came across a reference to their autobiography that was written during the time of World War I. And so I was like, okay, well, you know, if there's this biography, it's got to be somewhere. It's on archive.org. They've got tons of scans of old books. Can I buy a used copy of it on the internet, or either a reprint on Amazon, or is there a collectible edition somewhere? Is there somewhere to buy it? It was nowhere. There was nowhere to buy this. We went on the search, and we found one university library that had a copy of it back in Pennsylvania. And we were able to get them to scan it for us and send it to us. And so I want to go over what their biography says about themselves. Now, whether it's accurate or not, this is what they believe about themselves, okay? So this biography was, again, I think it was printed in 1917. And it is not in print anywhere, and is what they believe about themselves. So it was written by H. Ralph Burton. This guy was an insider, had an investigator for Congress, had major positions all throughout Congress. So their key beliefs, what they believe about their organization. They believe that they're the oldest club in existence that goes back to ancient Egypt. That they believe that they've been continuing on practicing those ancient mysteries, those ancient secrets to gain the power of the ancients. It's been the power behind the throne throughout time. This is what they said. They said it was the Colonel Edward Mandel House of the olden days. So even before all the conspiracy theorists came out many years later, recognizing who Colonel Edward Mandel House was, they admitted that Colonel Edward Mandel House was the power behind the throne. Their documents were that many of the major wars throughout history were about whomever had control of the Alfalfa Club documents won the wars. So all these wars throughout history, from ancient Egypt wars to the Trojan wars, on and on and on throughout time, these were all wars about trying to get the secrets of the Alfalfa Club. And that they the Alfalfa Club put into place the leaders of ancient societies all over the world, and even Japan. And that their records at this point in time, 1917, were what Germany was trying to get, what they were after in World War II, to make sure that they could gain power. Germany felt that if they could get the secret documents of the Alfalfa Club, that they would win the war and that they would become the world dominant superpower at that time. So now we look at the Alfalfa Club membership. Again, it's limited to elites in government, invitation only, and that new members are only accepted after they die. So again, we see this international conspiratorial organization weeding back through Utah politicians. So now let's go through just a brief run through history in the modern conspiracy. In 1776, the Illuminati is formed, Bavarian Illuminati by Adam Weishaupt. And when their courier was struck by lightning, they were discovered and they had to fake repentance, and they formed a new organization called the Jacobins. And then when they were found out, a new organization was formed called the Carbonari, and out of them came an organization called the Black Hand. We'll talk about the Black Hand a little bit later. Now, out of the Carbonari was the man we talked about earlier, Robert Owen. Robert Owen He was taught by Madame Blavatsky. Who's Madame Blavatsky? Madame Blavatsky was the founder of a group called the Lucifer Trust. Wasn't very popular, for recruitment reasons. And so they changed it to the Theosophical Society. And they're the only organization that is allowed to have a prayer room at the United Nations. So again, you've got Robert Owen trained Marx and Engels. We have William Gaby that we mentioned earlier, which goes to the Tribune, the Alta Club, and the Salt Lake Chamber. So now we go to ask the question of what's more dangerous? That looks pretty dangerous. I would not want to get mixed up in that. But then we have this. This is much more dangerous because look, the sheep, they're going to run away from that. But they're all gathered in really close to the wolf in sheep's clothing. They are, if somebody's looking like you, talking like you, acting like you, you're going to trust them. This is why the Savior was warning us about wolves in sheep's clothing. We need to avoid them because we need to understand who they are because they are tricking us into moving towards the direction of the New World Order. Now, there's a professor at Georgetown University. His name was Carroll Quigley. And he wrote a book called Tragedy and Hope, about 1,300 pages. And he was allowed to study the papers of this network that we've been talking about. And that's why he wrote the book, because he says, I agree with everything this international conspiracy is working on. The one thing I disagree with them on is that they wish to remain a secret. Everybody should know about what they're doing. He says one of the ways that they get away of how they implement their program is this. The two parties should be almost identical so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. Republican, Democrat, we still move towards bigger and bigger government and the destruction of our freedoms. And so we need to understand, especially right in the state of Utah, the wolves in sheep clothing, the people that, are we going to trust, as a general rule, the people in the state of Utah understand that Democrats are for big government and they're not going to be the ones to fool us. It's those that are on the R party that are saying, the word Constitution, the Founding Fathers, proper role of government, that are actually working to destroy our freedom that are more dangerous, following this program. So now going back to understanding the enemy, we understand the Illuminati because their papers were discovered when the courier was struck by lightning. They want to get rid of Christianity. They want to promote sensuality, the deification of it, the abandonment of religion, the political degeneracy, on and on and on, all things that we're seeing going on over the years. And the reason why we understand that the papers were discovered, Professor John Robison, in 1798, wrote the book Proofs of a Conspiracy. Our founding fathers read this book. John Adams read this book and wrote letters to his wife saying, get this book out to as many people as we can. The legislation that they passed, George Washington and John Adams warned about these organizations, this conspiracy. John Jay, the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States, he was the head of the New York Committee to rout out and expose conspiracy. That was the name of the committee. They understood what we were facing, and they were not afraid to say it. So this same organization, right, just kind of keeping this in the back of our mind. Now we're going to fast forward again to more modern times, back to Utah. We have the Council on Foreign Relations. Their publication was a book called, it was a magazine, a monthly or a quarterly magazine called Foreign Affairs. And in Foreign Affairs is where we can read to find out what their program is, what they're working on to come up next. And in Utah, we have a similar publication online called Utah Policy. And a few years ago, they did an article called Bacon's Gun and the Buckshot Caucus, Who Really Runs GOP Politics in Utah? And in this article, it said Utah Policy is told that members of the GOP Illuminati, Buckshot Caucus, are added again inside the Utah legislature. So it's blue because it's a hyperlink, and it takes you to the Wikipedia page for the Illuminati, saying, yeah, this is what we're talking about. And so this organization is made up, right? They've got their own logo and lapel pin. their logo is this. So they got their little bacon and buckshot. It's so funny. And they call themselves the Illuminati. In fact, before we started really exposing them and doing lots of reports about them, they would openly use the hashtag Utah Illuminati. You got former head of the Republican Party, you've got Amy Winter Newton, John Dougal, Todd Weiler, all these different legislators that are part of it using the hashtag Utah Illuminati. They're bragging about who they are. And the co-founder of this organization is a man by the name of Carl Downing, the co-founder. And on his Facebook page, he's changed it since then, but we screenshot his Facebook page. On the bottom of it says, who knows how this blank blank black hand, remember that name we mentioned that earlier, black hand, moves inside the halls of power. It's exactly how the Utah Policy magazine and article ended. Who knows how this buckshot caucus black hand moves inside the halls of power? So they call themselves the Utah Illuminati, and that can be dismissed as a joke, but they give another sign, another token of who they are, of what they are, to be able to identify themselves amongst each other. And that's the Black Hand, which we mentioned earlier was a direct subsidiary of the Bohemian Illuminati. Their constitution was based off of the Illuminati Constitution, and they were the secret society that were behind the assassinations that led to World War I of Duke Ferdinand. And so they named themselves Illuminati and the Black Hand, a more obscure reference to the same Bavarian Illuminati. Now, Carl Downing, he's a Republican. And on Twitter, he was having a conversation about Utah. And they said that statewide, that Utah is just barely over 50% LDS and shrinking. Salt Lake City is very Democrat and one of the gayest cities in the U.S. and proud of it. Okay, then somebody responds back and says, yeah, I've heard that Salt Lake isn't as Mormon as the rest of Utah. I was shocked when I heard that. To which Carl responded, Salt Lake just elected Jackie Biskipski as mayor. She's openly gay. It's a pretty great state and getting better. So this Republican Party activist that pretends to be all supporting gun rights says it's great that we're becoming less religious, less moral, and less conservative. Okay, so we need to diagnose the enemy, right? We have to understand that it's not just one party versus the other, that we're facing a conspiracy, people pretending to be one thing while doing something else. So when we started exposing the Buckshot Caucus, usually what happens is they'll poo-poo it. They'll make fun of it, saying, it's not a big of a deal, it's not what we mean. But the former Cache County Republican Party chairman, commenting on our article, said, check out the history of the original Illuminati. They're on the right side of most issues at the time. Freedom fighters. Not a very good speller, freedom victors, but it is social media. People don't have the same standards. So, now, this is not just about politics. This is a battle between Christ and Satan. We have to recognize that. Otherwise, we're going to get into this false mindset of, they just have to understand. No, they understand exactly what they're doing. And several years ago, there was a special election. There was a state legislator that had resigned their seat in the middle of the session, and so they brought together the delegates to have a special election to replace them. And so the head of the precinct committee, the precinct chairman, said, okay, it was a member of the Buckshot Caucus, said, before we have the election, we have this little ceremony we want to do. And there were a couple of members of Defending Utah there, happened to be delegates, and they were able to take pictures of what they did. They said, okay, before the vote, we're doing this. We're going to have this bowl of green M&Ms, and we're going to spray paint it red. Then we have these paper roses, and we're going to cut the tips off. Then we're going to wrap these guns in bacon, and we're going to put this can of Dr. Pepper on its side. And then we're going to vote. And there was 2 candidates left, and there was an odd number of delegates there to vote. Odd number of delegates to vote, even number of candidates. And somehow, there was a tie. Shocking. And so they said, okay, we're going to flip a coin, and I'll put the coin, and our Buckshot member won. So they provide these rituals. We don't know the exact meaning of it, but it obviously had meaning, and it helped them on their way to rig that local election. Okay, so now we look at the international outreach. We want to show that funnel again. We talked about, we have the Skull and Bones, we have the Alta Club, the heads of the Alta Club, their leaders are members of a Vatican secret society called the Sovereign Order of St. John of Jerusalem, which is a sub-secret order under the Knights of Malta. Outside of the Knights of Malta. And then we have the Council on Foreign Relations that meets through them as well. So we have these two branches of the international conspiracy funneling their programs out through the Alta Club to the rest of the state. Every single governor of the state of Utah from 1883 imposed on us by the federal government until today that we get to elect them were members of the Alta Club. Many of our U.S. senators, of course the Tribune's a part of that, the Salt Lake Chamber, of course, many state legislators. We have Envision Utah as a program, World Trade Center Utah, University of Utah and the Skull and Bones, Zion's Bank, and of course the Buckshot Caucus, the Utah Illuminati. So we have this funnel where then they go through to be able to send their other organizations to implement certain parts of the overall agenda. That way we can say, oh, that darn Salt Lake Tribune, they're so liberal, but then we still have all these other parts of the puzzle still implementing the program, even if there's one or two or three of those that we're like, oh yeah, we don't trust them, but we still have like 3 or 4 of them that we're like, oh yeah, that guy's great, when he's actually a part of this conspiracy. So now we've told you all these things, right? This is what I don't want to do, right? I don't want to be the most informed person in the concentration camp. I told you so. This was all real. Doesn't do us any good, right? This does not help us out to know about these things. I'm not trying to educate you. I'm trying to build understanding so that we can be effective in our efforts to actually stop this. Because the Apostle James tells us that we are to be doers of the word and not hearers only. In Ether chapter 8, Moroni gives us a specific commandment that he tells us these things so that we can repent of our sins and not allow the secret combination to continue to get above us. He says, wake up to the fact that it's above you and don't allow it to get above you. So it's there. And no matter when you were born, there's no excuse not to be a part of the effort to destroy the secret combination. But if you don't understand it, you will not be effective in doing so, following this commandment we've been given in Scriptures. It says, if we don't, even the sword of the justice of the eternal God will fall upon you to your individual overthrow and collective overthrow and destruction if you will allow these things to be. And I've got to tell you about these things, he says, so that evil may be done away. Too often in our kind of group of people, we understand we're awake to what's going on, but we're also falling into this trap of, well, it's prophecy, there's nothing we can do about it. Well, why are we told about these things? Why are we told to not allow them to get above us if there's nothing we can do about it? Clearly, there's something that we're commanded to do about it. In fact, Ezra Taft Benson explained, the Lord has declared that before the second coming of Christ, it will be necessary to destroy the secret works of darkness in order to preserve the land of Zion, the Americas. This is something that we're a part of in preparing for the second coming of the Lord, not just bystanders with our hoard of food storage waiting for the world to collapse around us saying, I told you so. We are here to destroy these secret combinations and to build something. Not just what we're against, what are we for? John Taylor, we're not just waiting for it to be acted upon, we are to be doers, we are to act. John Taylor in the Government of God said, but if Zion is never built up, the Lord will never come, for he must have a people and a place to come to. Okay? We have to destroy the secret combinations, we have to build Zion. That's what we're doing to prepare for the second coming of the Lord. This is what they did to prepare for the second coming of the Lord. We're supposed to be doers of the word, and so that's why we formed Defending Utah. We want people to do something about it. And because we understand who the enemy is, we've been able to be successful. There was a guy that was defending his own property in Provo with a gun, and instead of arresting the people that were trespassing, the police arrested the homeowner. We interviewed him on our radio program. On the radio program, we told his story. We talked about the jury's job to not only judge guilt or innocence, but to judge the law. The lawyer for this individual played this interview during the trial. Said technically his client broke the law, but the law is unjust. And because of that, the jury found him not guilty. And afterwards, able to interview one of the juries that said they were anti-gun, said, I had to find him not guilty because it was unjust. We're able to help protect parents, their Fifth Amendment rights. People, there was a form to opt out of vaccination to go to government schools. And it said that if you sign this form, you're saying, yes, I admit that I'm harming my child. We're able to expose that and get rid of that. We forced the legislature to change the wording. We were able to, there was many Obamacare expansion bills the Republican legislature was introducing to stop that by exposing it. There was a creation of a vaccine database a few years ago that we were able to postpone. One of these fake conservatives that would always talk about the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, and federalism was actually building Agenda 21 in Utah. And so we dissected his bills and showed how his bills were building bigger government. They were building Obamacare, that they were building Agenda 21. And we were able to get him removed from his legislative positions. We were able to get him fired from the organization that he found and eventually retired from the legislature instead of losing in an election. Further on, of course, we have more. Because of the materials that we're able to produce, people are drawn to it. We have more subscribers than the Salt Lake Tribune, than other organizations that are supposedly liberty organizations in the state. People are drawn to us. If you guys remember the Count My Vote battle, the Republican grassroots were very much trying to stop Count My Vote. And so they forced the leadership that wanted Count My Vote to file a lawsuit against it. But the lawyer that they hired was consistently late. He was always, but it wasn't just like late, it was like 30 seconds late. It was like he's like, okay, I'm looking at the clock, okay, now I'm late, I'm gonna turn it in. So now it wasn't effective. And so they were throwing the case. We discovered that Count My Vote's birth was at the Alta Club. We showed who were the founders of the Count My Vote movement at this meeting, and we got this information to the head of the Constitution Party in Utah. They showed it to their lawyer. The lawyer said, oh, that guy, one of the founders of Count My Vote, was appointed as the arbiter to negotiate between both sides. That's obviously bogus. So they were able to get rid of that. And they said, oh, now we know why that guy's not filing the paperwork. I'll just file the paperwork instead, because he was telling me he was going to do it, so I just left it to him. But now I understand he's not going to do it, so I'll do it. And so that led to the only victory in court for against Count My Vote, and preserving the neighborhood caucus was because of that. Yay. We have our own radio show. We were able to get the word out. Lots of good network with a lot of good other constitutional-minded individuals throughout the state. We've been able to elect city council members in many states throughout the, 3 cities throughout the state. In fact, one of them, where we have a majority of the members of the city council are members of Defending Utah. They have nullified all of the governor's mandates. They are actually working to rescind all of the regulations on, if you own property in the city of Duchesne, you're allowed to do it without asking their permission. And so we're really working to go on the offense to restore liberty. We're leading other organizations to be able to work together when we can, to be able to join together and force us to do so. So we want to encourage you to learn more about the things that we've talked about and other issues. Go to defendingutah.org and click on the Learn tab with lots of different subjects, and also encourage you to read the book, The Hidden Things of Darkness, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, The Naked Capitalist. This is a 180-page review of the 1,300-page book I mentioned earlier, Tragedy and Hope. Myths to the Victors Go the Myths and Monuments, a great book on the Illuminati in America. And then to learn more about the Federal Reserve, encourage you to read The Creature from Jekyll Island. Also want to let you know that we are having we're having Liberty speakers here every single month. So we encourage you to come and make sure you follow us, subscribing to our emails so that you get notifications. Make sure that you know, the 50 or so people that wanted to register and come tonight that weren't able to because it's sold out, that you're able to get a good seat in advance by doing so. Also encourage you to become a member. We have sign-up forms on the table and other materials to help yourself become more educated. But thank you so much for your time tonight. I hope I've been able to scratch the surface and that we can start to think about what's right, not about who's right, so that we can now start to move forward to actually be effective and not trust the wrong people to do the right thing when they're actually working behind the scenes to destroy liberty. Thank you.
What do you guys think? Is that that's pretty amazing. There's a lot. It's awful and amazing at the same time. So one more round of applause for Ben McClintock. A lot of good stuff. So I don't need to speed it more, but I will. Please consider joining Defending Utah. We need more people that get it and that are awake and are willing to do something about it. And we are more effective together. And the more people we can awaken and join our numbers, it matters. It makes a difference, and we're growing, and it is making a difference. You being here and all those people tuning in online, we are making a difference, and we are expanding, and our numbers will be felt, and our influence to restore liberty and to expose evil. And it is a wonderful feeling to be on the right side of things, as you all know. And so thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to, so one more thing, please mingle, visit, ask questions afterward. You're welcome to stay. And we have the tables up here and here where you can buy materials. And please check out our website, defendingutah.org as well. So we will now close.